Hello and welcome back to Bible, Brats, and Brew with your hosts Brandon and Greg. Today we're going to talk a little bit over Exodus chapter 11 and chapter 12, looking at the last plague and the Passover. Along with that, we're also going to give you a little bit of what we thought about the brats and the brew that we have today. Just our opinions and our thoughts on it. And
which are objectively correct.
Absolutely. So we thank you all for listening in here again on Bible, Brats, and Brew. And let's have a little bit of fun. All right, Brandon, before we start talking about any type of brat and brew, is there anything you want to just kind of tell the audience today about chapter 11 and 12 of Exodus?
Yeah, so where we left off, we were talking about a bunch of signs. So there were three groups of three, and it was kind of building up where God was demonstrating his mighty power over Pharaoh. And we saw that Pharaoh kept on hardening his heart, and God was hardening his heart so that there was this resistance against this message and truth of God's true power. This whole section is all about Israelites needing to be freed from their slavery of the world, because real freedom is service to God. And so they need to go, they need to cease to be servants of Pharaoh to be rescued from him. So they'd be rescued for being servants of God, which is going to be the second half. And so we're really approaching this kind of pinnacle point where it transitions into not just the conversation of how to be free from the world and Pharaoh and sin, but to be free for the things of God. So there's a lot of cool pivotal points, and this is the climax of this of these series of signs that we're going to see. It's going to talk about the Passover. And then we'll see what happens. I think everyone knows probably, but we'll read it.
Absolutely. And if one of us yawns today, just so you know, we on top of the brats, we had some side stuff like corn and a couple steaks. So
yeah.
Yawn, sorry about that.
Sam, Greg's wife, my sister, asked me yesterday like what I wanted for a side, and I said steaks, and so I picked up some steaks, and so I'm in a food coma. Honestly, I'm gonna be taking a nap probably. This might be like a 3-hour podcast, and most of it's snoring. So.
No, I'm just joking.
Yeah. So I already yawned once, to be honest. So this either need to be a longer or a shorter episode.
Right. I agree.
We also had brats.
We did.
In addition to our steaks that we had, and we have these two brews. So the brats were Johnsonville beer brats. We'll tell you what we thought of them later. Yeah. The steaks were better. Spoiler alert. That's what happens when you get steak as a side. But we both have Australian themed brews, which I'm excited for. We did a little planning there. I have a root beer I have not tried. Greg said he tried this before.
Yeah, I like that stuff.
It's Bundaberg. It is an Australian root beer. So I've heard that this is very uniquely. It tastes unique because it's Australian root beer instead. Yep. So I have no idea what it tastes like. The fun thing is, when I was on vacation out in Oregon, I actually got this root beer at an authentic Australian meat pie restaurant.
So
they sold meat pies like they do like. I assume people in Australia, I guess, eat meat pies. So I had a meat pie, and I didn't drink the root beer with the meat pie. I wanted to save it for this podcast. So I'm excited to try it out, and we'll see how it goes. Now, what is your Australian themed?
It's a Foster's.
I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, so it's a little bit lighter. And, it's funny that it's brewed here in America, but it carries an Australian name, but it still has the Australian flavors and
all that. The important thing is both of our mine's not even a can; it's a weird glass bottle, but they both have kangaroos on it, and that's the most important thing.
Right, but there's something special about that bottle too that you got. The top, I think.
It's a weird top. I want to open it up. I don't know if it's how much noise it's going to make. The funny thing is, it says you have to invert the bottle before you open it.
Supposed
I
to
did
mix
that.
it all up.
Yeah, I did that already. So let's see how this sounds. Oh, yeah, that made a great noise.
That was nice. I like that.
All right, so we talked about our brats, we talked about our brews. Let's go ahead and
Keep going on chapter 11.
Yep, you can go ahead and start reading chapter 11.
All right. Now the Lord said to Moses, one more plague I will bring on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will surely drive you out from here completely. Speak now in the hearing of the people that each man ask from his neighbor and each woman from her neighbor for articles of silver and articles of gold. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Furthermore, the man Moses himself was greatly esteemed in the land of Egypt, both in sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people. And Moses said, Thus says the Lord, about midnight I am going out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones, all the firstborn of the cattle as well. Moreover, there shall be a great cry in all the land of Egypt, such as there has not been before, and such as shall never be again. But against any of the sons of Israel, a dog shall not even bark, whether against man or beast, that you may understand how the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. And all these your servants will come down to me and bow themselves before me, saying, Go out, you and all the people who follow you, and after I will go out. And when he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger, then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, so that my wonders will be multiplied in the land of Egypt. And Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, yet the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the sons of Israel go out of his land. So, what are your thoughts?
I gotta share my thoughts first. So there's a couple things that stood out to me as I was reading and studying this this week. So, so we already know that God's intention is that they were going to leave and they're going to be prospered to receive those articles of silver and gold, and so that was already talked about previously and foretold. It's interesting that it talks about how the people that Moses was highly esteemed by the servants of Pharaoh and in the sight of the people. So that's also kind of an interesting tidbit in that his behavior and his actions have reflected that he is a messenger of God.
Right. Well, and that kind of goes back to chapter 3, right, with the burning bush.
Yeah, it's interesting in that Moses was so concerned about not being received, but this was God's work, and that's something that can be trusted in. So I thought that was interesting. One thing that as I was studying, when it talks about the firstborns that are going to be dying, it emphasizes both the highest in the hierarchy and the lowest. So in the hierarchy, it's like a caste system. These ancient Egyptians, that there were certain people of higher status, and so Pharaoh was of course on top. He was a god man in their worldview. And so then there's the pyramid goes wider and wider. I remember learning about that pyramid in 6th grade, actually. Mm-hmm. And I don't exactly remember the caste order, so I don't want to say it, but I believe it goes Pharaoh, then the scribes, and then the soldiers. And then we have farmers, and then we have slaves at the very bottom. And so the two people that are listed is Pharaoh, who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones. And so millstones is you're taking rocks and you're grinding them up together to grind stuff. And so this is a very low position. This is a slave girl, which is even lower than other slaves. And so the idea is that every single facet of the society is going to be impacted by these firstborns dying, even the animals themselves. and that is going to create such despair. And so this whole time, there's been an increasing intensity of these signs. That first it was like annoyance, like with mosquitoes or like biting insects, but then it became dangerous for people, and then things were being destroyed. And so throughout this whole time, Pharaoh is just constantly rejecting God. He's rejecting God's power over these, even though the Pharaoh's magicians, priests, couldn't replicate it, and was saying this is the finger of God. And so we see this like final moment where he is hardening his heart. God is hardening his heart. God is allowing Pharaoh to make the choice that is going to result to doom for his nation and for his people. Yeah. And so it's a very intense moment.
It is. Well, and let's before we move forward, let's talk a little bit about that class system that we were briefly mentioning. So you got the Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh or king, because this is replicated with many governments throughout even our modern history, right? So you got the Pharaoh or the king. Then you have government officials, nobles and priests, scribes and soldiers, artisans and merchants, peasants and slaves.
Did you look that up?
Yep, I was
going to say, I'm like, oh, I forgot the priests and the artisans.
Yeah, no,
I got the right order. It's okay to miss a couple steps in the pyramid.
Absolutely. No, I wanted to bring that up because it really resembles even like what we have going on in modern societies, in the world with different governance and all that stuff too. So it's just kind of cool to see how history does repeat itself, and there's bits and pieces that are taken from history and culture, and it's still moving forward today. Whether it's right or wrong, I mean, that's left to everybody else's discernment, but it really proves that, what's being talked about in scripture here is, 100% true, right? Because we can see the evidence just right there in just a class system. So
yeah, no. Another interesting tidbit that I was reading about, it says in verse 7, but against any of the sons of Israel, a dog shall not even bark. So that's initially a really weird sentence, but it's emphasizing what had happened in other signs, and that God is going to spare his people, the Israelites. And so the reason why it says like a dog won't even bark is because dogs in like Egyptian society, they're vermin, like they're pests. They're not like pets. They're not highly esteemed. They're like urban scavengers that are even dangerous. Like wild dog packs aren't a thing like a lot of people have experience with, but there's like dangerous packs that are in Eastern Europe. I remember when I went there, they warned us that like there could be like 100 wild like feral dogs.
Oh,
you need to be careful of that and cautious of that. And so these dogs were just like vermin, and they were just urban scavengers. And so if there was a commotion, they would like start barking and like being riled up. And so the fact that there's not going to even be a dog barking in that neighborhood means it's going to be quiet and peaceful, and it's going to be entirely spared from this massive judgment that's going to be falling on Egypt. And so this is just emphasizing that the supernatural protection that God has for his people in sparing them of this judgment. And when it comes to sparing of this judgment, we're going to be talking about the Passover here in a second. And that really enforces, like the ritual of the Passover, it was for them to remember what happened this day.
Right.
And we're going to see what God instructs them to do and as a way of remembrance for what God is doing and the ritual like significance of some of the things. And so do you got anything else you wanted to say about chapter 11 before we move on to the Passover?
The only thing I would say too is that Numbers 11 references the mill, right? The millstones. That this was really actually a labor that was very difficult, right? So Numbers 11:8 says the people would roam about and gather it and grind it between two millstones and pound it in the mortar and boil it in the pot and make loaves with it. And it tastes like the taste
being a
of
miller, would not be great. That's a lot of hard work
in the heat.
Yeah.
So I really want to paint a picture of like how hard that labor really is. And if anybody knows about milling today, doing it by hand would be excruciating. I mean, we got machines to do that now, but to actually mill something, a grain by hand, it can cause excruciating pain in the hands and the forearms and the shoulders. So, I mean, people were going through some really hard times.
Yeah. Everyone can, and I think this is emphasizing like the nature of God's judgment in this moment, and
Right.
like the highest of the high sitting on the throne versus the girl that's sitting like in the dirt or the mud
Yeah.
with the millstones. No one is able to like escape from God's judgment outside of the Israelites because they're receiving protection from God. Now, are the Israelites morally superior? We're going to find out that they have messed up a lot of times in Exodus.
Absolutely.
And we're going to see that it's because of God's nature and his goodness that people are spared, not because of their own inherent goodness. And so let's go ahead and move on to chapter 12. I think it's my turn to read some.
It sure is.
Verse 1, chapter 12. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall be the beginning of the months to you. It is the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month they are each to take a lamb for themselves, according to their father's households, a lamb for each household. Now, if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor nearest to the house are to take one according to the numbers of persons in them, according to what each man shall eat. They are to divide the lamb. Your lamb shall be an unblemished male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or the goats, and you shall keep it within until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight. Moreover, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts on the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that same night, roast it with fire, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of its raw or boiled at all with water, but rather roasted with fire both its head and legs along with its entrails. You shall not leave any of it until morning. Whatever is left of it until morning you shall burn with fire. Now you shall eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, man, this translation, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike down all the firstborns in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be a sign for your houses where you live, and when I see the blood I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt.
You know, there's something, so right at the very beginning, in verse 2, where this month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you. So one thing with that, because this is still practiced today in remembrance of what happened, right, in the Exodus. And the first month would be associated with Rosh Hashanah. And I believe that there's 4 New Years that is actually celebrated right now. And then the other big one that people will know is like... is it Rosh Yom Kippur, I believe? So Nisan is the first month, or that's what it's called in the Mishnah, or Mishnah. But the first one being between March and April, that's what we would celebrate as the Passover. Then the second one would be the Rosh Hashanah that leads into Yom Kippur. That's the other New Year's too. And that's celebrated in the fall. And usually there's a big harvest over here going on during that time, so late September, early October. So this is something that we're seeing a newness of life, a new year, things hopefully to get better, produce coming in, all that good stuff, sustainability, life, and a skipping of things that are bad, right? So that was just one thing I just wanted to speak on that it's very relatable to us today, even though we don't celebrate the Jewish feasts as a Gentile Christian. I mean, we can partake in them and honor them, and I guess we could partake in them too. But I mean, it's just not a real practice that we do here. But just to give it honor and respect, I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, no, I've never participated one, but I have like looked at how the meal is eaten, because a lot of the meal is symbolic, and so
Right.
they have the bitter herbs that are referencing here.
Right.
There's also like salty water that's supposed to like represent like the tears of the
Yep.
slaves, and then sometimes they drip it on the vegetables, sometimes they drip it somewhere else. I really can't describe it a lot more because I probably say something incorrect, but a lot of rich like symbolism about the journey
Yeah.
of the Jewish people and related to that. So I think it's definitely a hallmark, because there's a huge emphasis on remembering this, because this is clearly one of the most pivotal moments of the Israelites, because it turns
Right.
from slavery of Pharaoh to serving God. That's their trajectory here, and so this is a major turning point. And so this is pretty riveting, and so it's meant to be remembered. But there's a couple things
Yeah.
that are going on here that I think are worth explaining and worth noting. So one is all of like there's a lot of details about like what you're supposed to wear for this meal and like how it's supposed to be prepared, and some of that might seem odd, but it's basically just means it's like fast food. It's food on the go. And so I'm going to reference a few things. They wanted it to be fire roasted instead of boiled, because boiling is going to take a lot longer for preparing that
Right.
meat. And so they just want the meat to be ready as quickly as it can. And they're wearing things that they wouldn't do outside. So their loins are girdled. They have like all of their like robes that are like tucked into their belts, and that's what you do if you're traveling.
Right.
And so your sandals, they don't wear sandals in their home, but they are here today because they need to be able to leave as soon as possible. They got their
Right.
traveling staff in their hand. Unleavened bread, they don't want to have the yeast take time to have the bread be raised. Instead, it's going to be unleavened.
Right. Well, and then even at that too with the yeast, like it could, if they just had a dough, it would die in extreme heat too, because it takes, what is it? Yeast can't live above a certain temperature, and if it was a dough rising, and let's just say it hit, 108 degrees air temp, and then you got all that radiant heat coming off, the ground wherever they're traveling. I mean, it would kill the yeast, and then it would actually promote a bacteria in the food, so they would all got really sick.
Yeah. So all in all, it's meant to be fast food. This
Right.
is food that they are trusting that God is going to be victorious. That His word that the Egyptians are going to desire for them to leave, and even like gift them gold and silver to leave. Is going to be true, because at this point, like there's been so many miraculous signs, and Pharaoh has not let up, and so this is a moment of faith that I will trust that God is going to demonstrate His power and fully win this victory,
Right.
and that they're going to be leaving so soon after this Passover event that they need to be ready that night to go.
Absolutely. And I always think to myself too, what would these people from this specific time, what would they think about our fast food right now? How would they feel about Burger King
Too expensive.
too too expensive?
Yeah, not
Yeah.
kosher. Definitely not kosher.
No.
We haven't gone to kosher laws yet.
No, we haven't yet.
Exodus doesn't talk a lot about kosher laws. Leviticus does. Maybe
does.
we'll cover Leviticus one day, but
Oh, absolutely.
those cheeseburgers, they're good, but that's not kosher. That's for sure.
Well, we got probably about 7 minutes left. What do you want to cover for this? And then 'cause we'll give you our thoughts too on the brats and the brew and in the sequel of this one in the
So
part two.
with the time we have left in this episode, I think we can maybe start the conversation about like why are they putting blood on the doorposts?
Yeah,
Because that's sort of a ritualistic thing that is like definitely not what we would be doing nowadays. And so there's a couple explanations for it. So this, I'm trying to think of where they use the hyssop on it. Oh yeah, we haven't read enough of it. going to verse 21 of chapter 12, it says, "Then Moses called for all the elders of Egypt, of Israel, and said to them, Go and take yourselves lambs according to the families, slay the Passover lamb, and you shall take a bunch of hyssop, and dip it in the blood which is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is on the basin of the lintel to the lintel and the two doorposts, and none of you shall go outside of this house until morning." And so here's the instructions on that. So there is a couple things that are going on that, and I think both of them have an element of why this is happening. So ancient Near Eastern culture definitely has this idea that like this blood is like a deterrent from like evil, and so it's used. Mesopotamians actually painted their doorways red in order to like shear away demons, and like in their like philosophy and their worldview, and so there's an element of like repelling, but I think the primary emphasis here is that there's a sacrificial element, and there is a purifying, a consecrating element.
Absolutely.
So the hyssop that I wanted to reference, that is a plant to which you can Google to what it looks like, but it's used in a significant amount of like purification rituals. That these plant leaves are used to like dip into water or dip into blood in order to transfer it to something else. And so this blood is purifying their homes so that they are sanctuaries, that these people are going to also be purified. The fact that they're supposed to like consume this flesh is emphasized multiple times. It is supposed to be consumed all that night, and any leftovers there is supposed to be burnt as a burnt offering, that there's nothing else to be saved up. And so this is all emphasizing kind of this sacrificial element of this lamb,
right?
That it's taking the place of something to protect. It is purifying them, making it a sanctuary, like a temple, and that the fact that they are participating in this food, it means that element of purification and consecration is applying to them, that they are being set apart as a people. These consecration elements we're going to see later with the priesthood, that they are separated from the Israelites to be leaders of them. And so we're probably out of the 7 minutes we had, but we'll talk a little bit more about like the purification and the consecration probably in the next episode.
Absolutely, because there's some implications that
now we haven't even mentioned Jesus,
right? That are related to us as modern believers too. So, but well, Brandon and I thank you again for listening in.
Yeah, I definitely listened the whole time. Yeah, I paid attention.
He does. He pays attention. So thank you again for joining us on part 1, and we'll have part 2 up here shortly, and we're going to continue going over Exodus chapter 12, and we'll give you our thoughts and opinions on the brats and brew.